best teacher that you've ever had. The teacher could be in a school setting, a coach, an extracurricular leader, a peer that you learn from, however you choose to define a teacher for yourself. What did they teach you? How did they teach you? The learning that impacted me the most came from my peers. In the youth group I grew up in, none of the adults ever ran any educational sessions for us. It was up to us to plan and run fun, engaging educational activities for each other. Sometimes the person running the activity was the president, and sometimes it was a person who just joined. You didn't need to be in charge or be in a leadership position to run an effective workshop. In our professional lives, experiential learning often manifests in the workshops, sessions, or meetings that we run. As folks in tech, we love learning new things. And for us, as leaders in this room, it's part of our job to teach as well. Whether these teachings are peer teaching, introspection and reflection of some sort, professional development of skills, some meetings, the goal anytime we're leading or teaching something is to have everyone walk out of the session with a better, deeper, clearer understanding of a topic. And lots of folks say that they want their talks or the things that they're teaching to be interactive. But interactivity doesn't just mean allowing people to ask questions throughout your presentation. Interactivity is about helping information sink in a more effective way. Workshops can happen anywhere. They can be 30 minutes long or 3 hours long. They can be conducted by a peer, a manager, or even the newest intern on your team. Most people are really nervous about doing these interactive sessions. Common fears are things like people won't be interested, they're gonna think it's so corny, it's too difficult to come up with these ideas, or I don't know enough to be a good facilitator for this type of thing. And so an interactive workshop becomes a talk or a slide deck. But experiential workshops are so amazing, and they can have a much larger impact on the folks that you're presenting to. Experiential workshops are defined as learning through reflection on doing. In experiential learning, the learner plays an active role. This educational approach really started to come into play in the 1970s by David Kolb, who developed ELM, the experiential learning model. The model has 4 parts: concrete experience, observation and reflection, formation of concepts based on that reflection, and then testing or actually using these new concepts. I've used this same approach in a variety of professional and volunteer roles and industries to run seminars, team retreats, and peer-led learning sessions for over 20 years. I work at GitHub as the engineering manager for Atom. If you want to talk about Atom, please come find me. I'm also on the board of Ruby Together, and I run a podcast called Parent-Driven Development about being a parent in tech. I also have stickers for all of these different things. So if you want stickers, also come find me. So today I'm going to teach you the formula for how to put together and run an effective interactive workshop. And while we're going through it, you are going to create your own interactive workshop with the worksheets that you have on your chair. As we go through each step, we're going to take short breaks to brainstorm and do some creative thinking and chatting. I do ask, however, that you come back to me quickly at the end of allotted time so that we can dive into the next section. So here's the formula: goals, trigger, discussion, conclusion, supporting materials, and materials needed. First, let's dive into goals. A workshop needs to have a goal. You need to know what the outcome is. What do you want people to walk away with? Why are you running this workshop in particular? Here are a few very different examples that can all be turned into interactive sessions. Enable teammates to have a better sense of their individual leadership styles. Give teams tools to communicate with one another effectively and respectfully. Learn some basic computer science algorithms and how they relate to everyday programming. or have folks think critically about company values and how they relate to them individually and as a team. I'll be developing a workshop as an example, so my goal is to help individuals think about their current values as everyday leaders and reflect on how these values have changed over the past few years. Now it's your turn. So I'm going to go back to the slide with a couple of goals examples. So again, think about what you are trying to accomplish. When someone walks out of the room, what new knowledge do you want them to have? Turn to the person next to you or in front of you or behind you, introduce yourself, brainstorm some ideas, and write down some goals. I will give you 2 minutes to do this. Go. All right. Okay, hopefully you'll have some really amazing goals now to work from. So next comes the trigger. A trigger is what kicks things off and really gets people thinking. A trigger can be anywhere from 5 minutes to 45 minutes, depending on how long your workshop is. Your trigger should be as long as is needed to have a significant discussion afterwards. So remember, in the idea of experiential learning, there is this concrete experience, and then the observation and reflection based on that experience. The trigger is the thing that they're experiencing. Triggers, like retrospective activities, have hundreds of methodologies. Some of these options include skits, drawing, social barometers, quizzes, self-identification. I'm going to run through a couple of definitions. So a skit is like a little play that folks can act out. A drawing is taking out a piece of paper and drawing something related to the goal that you have. Social barometer is where you split the room, and you generally have like a yes-no side or an agree-disagree, and people can sort of move around the room based on questions that you ask. A quiz can be a few questions that you hand out or that you ask the group. And self-identification is folks generally thinking about themselves and categorizing themselves. You can also use quotes, book passages, children's books, speeches, and more as triggers. Triggers are not complex, but they're creative. They get people thinking and sometimes moving and really engaging with the topic at hand. So for our example, I'll use some self-reflection. I'd have laptop stickers that represent the various characteristics that are listed here. Participants would have 10 minutes to walk around the room and think about the things that they value the most and think that they currently demonstrate as leaders. Participants can pick up as many or as few characteristics as they'd like, and they can pick up multiples of a sticker if that value is particularly important to them. Okay, so now it's your turn again. I'll go back to the slide that has a bunch of different ideas on it. Brainstorm in pairs about which trigger you find most interesting and you would want to use for your workshop. If it's hard to think of one, that's okay. Go with something simple. You'll get better at putting these workshops together and thinking more creatively or about different, more complex triggers as you do more of them. I will give you 2 minutes. Go. All right. Okay, so now I've got goals and a trigger. Next is the discussion. The discussion is what gives everyone a chance to talk and reflect on the activity that they just participated in. They hear each other's thoughts and ideas, sometimes feelings and emotions, depending on what sort of workshop you're running and what the goals are, and this pulls together a lot of different pieces. The discussion is often transformative, even for folks who you may not expect it from. To create discussion questions, go back to your goal. Think about what you're hoping to get out of the activity and tailor your questions around that. What did they just experience in the trigger that you want to know more about or that you want them to explore further? Examples of good discussion questions include, would someone like to share? What do you think about? How did you decide or determine? What was difficult? What was easy? You can also think creatively about how to facilitate a discussion. If you have a large group or a large number of introverts, try starting the discussion in pairs or small groups. Getting people talking together will help them be comfortable before getting to the discussion in a larger group. Or break people up into smaller groups and then come together for a final question or two that revolves around, what did you discuss in your small group? Facilitating discussions can be a challenge. There are a few small tips that I feel can really go a long way. First, get comfortable with silence. If you don't interrupt the silence, someone else will. While it sometimes feels uncomfortable to sit there because it feels like nobody else has anything left to say, if you wait just a little longer than you're comfortable with, someone else oftentimes chimes in. Silence also gives introverts a chance to think through what they want to say before volunteering to speak. Ask open-ended questions. A closed question is something with a yes-no answer. And in a discussion, if you ask a yes-no question, you will get a yes-no answer. However, if you frame the same question as an open question, something that involves responding with an explanation and not just a yes or no, you'll get more involved, more in-depth answers that will often lead to other people speaking and will keep the conversation going. Make sure to call on people who haven't spoken yet. So don't do this by calling on specific people, because that can be really scary and intimidating. But if you give space, if you say something like, does anyone who hasn't spoken yet have anything to say or want to say anything? It gives folks who might not be comfortable inserting themselves into the conversation the space and time to speak up. Finally, keep the discussion on topic, but let it flow. This one's tricky. Usually, though, when you're leading a discussion, you have like these questions listed that you want to ask. But if you ask them in a list, it feels really unnatural. It makes things feel really quiz-like rather than a flowing conversation. So keep a few of the questions that you have in mind and try to bring up these questions naturally as the discussion sort of organically leads to them. Don't worry if this feels pretty weird and jarring when you first start doing it. It's a little tricky and it takes some time to get used to. So for our example workshop, the questions that I would ask are, who would like to share which stickers they chose and why? Think about which stickers you may have chosen 5 years ago. Would they be the same? Would they be different? Are your current stickers your ideal? And what do you hope your sticker set might look like in a few years? Now it's your turn again. Jot down a few discussion questions that you'd want to ask for your workshop. I'll give you 1 minute. Go. I know the times are getting shorter as we get further into the talk. You'll get less and less time. Okay. So next, we have the conclusion. The conclusion is how you bring it all together. When you run a great workshop, you need to close it in a thoughtful way. A conclusion can be a thoughtful statement, a call to action, silent reflection, or a final thought from the group as a way to conclude. One example is have everyone go around and say one thing they learned about themselves during the course of the activity. Another example is to have folks write on an index card what they want their next step to be and to keep it with them. Conclusion statements or activities are generally pretty short, under 5 minutes, especially for shorter workshops. In our example, a conclusion would be a statement like, there are many different leadership values and leadership styles. We're always evolving as leaders. Feel free to keep these stickers on your laptop or in your office to periodically think about if your values as a leader have changed since doing this exercise. For longer workshops, like 5 hours or more, day-long workshops, your conclusion may be a bit longer. Okay, your turn. Think of what you might want to do as a conclusion for the workshop that you've created. I will give you 1 minute, maybe 45 seconds. Go. The next two parts are about supporting the workshop and making sure that your workshop has lasting power, which are just as important as running the actual workshop. So next are supporting materials. You, as the facilitator, may know everything that needs to be known about the subject you're running a workshop on. But if you have multiple facilitators, like if you're breaking people up into smaller groups, the supporting materials are how you empower others by giving them the information they need in order to guide the conversation intelligently and thoughtfully. Supporting materials allow anyone in the future to pick up this workshop and run it themselves. Supporting materials are not books. You need to ensure that your materials are manageable for a person to get through in a short period of time. It could include a few blog posts, a particularly good article, examples of styles like leadership or communication styles, or a book excerpt. If you choose a book excerpt as supporting materials, try to get as specific as possible. Even go as far as highlighting the key sentences or points. For our workshop, the supporting materials that I would have would be a glossary of common leadership values or characteristics, and a few blog posts about some leadership profiles. Your turn. You'll get 30 seconds for this one. So off the top of your head, what might be some supporting materials that you would include? Go. 5 seconds. 5 seconds, 4, 3, 2. All right. So finally, we get to materials needed. The materials needed are the final portion of running a successful workshop. This part keeps you happy and organized and also allows others to run your workshop successfully in the future. The materials listed and materials needed should be everything and anything that you need. Do you need scissors to cut big pieces of paper? Do you need tape to put something on a wall? Do you need pens? This should cover everything. So for my workshop, this is what I would need. Stickers, more than the number of people in the group for each type of sticker. Paper, in case someone wants to create their profile on a piece of paper. And signs labeling the value associated with each sticker so that people don't have to remember and you don't have to answer that question 10,000 times. Okay, your turn. 30 seconds. What do you need to run your workshop? Think of everything. Go. 10 seconds. 30 seconds goes by really fast. All right. That is 30 seconds. Okay. So now you might be thinking, my team would never go for this. This sounds great and all, but they would think it's corny. They would think that it's not worth their time, and a small number of folks, maybe even just one individual, would ruin it for everyone. So I'm going to tell you a story. This is a story about the worst volunteer experience ever assigned. As a staff member for an international immersion experience, the trip always included a volunteer experience, something that was 4 to 5 hours long, usually an afternoon on our itinerary. And some of these experiences were interesting, they were rewarding, they were impactful. Some of these experiences would leave students talking about what they did and how that made them think and feel for weeks and months beyond the activity. This was not that experience. When we received our itinerary, we learned that our volunteer experience was going to be picking onions. Not just picking onions on a brutally hot day during an intense heat wave without any real connection to why we were picking onions, who we were picking them for. There was going to be no representative there to make any sort of connections for us. And so as a staff, we discussed this, and we knew that it was probably going to suck. But our plan was to make it seem like the most exciting activity they had ever done. So days before onion picking, we started talking about onion picking. We chatted about gleaning the earth. We talked about how much fun it would be to be outside. For 3 days, we talked about how amazing the entire experience would be. We were going to be outside, we were going to be getting dirty, we were going to be doing something that most of them had never done before. And when we drove up to this field, those 50 students were so excited, like genuinely, intensely excited to pick onions. They picked hundreds of onions. They were so excited to be smelling like onions, to be comparing their piles of onions. They took pictures. I think that we have the most number of pictures of anything from this trip on about onion picking. They were so happy with how many onions they picked. And so the moral of this story is that there's power in words. If you're positive, excited, and confident in what you're doing, what you're teaching, and what you want people to walk out of the workshop knowing, then your excitement and enthusiasm will be contagious. And if you can, try to get some other folks excited in advance about it as well. Even if you've got some folks who will probably bring some negative energy on the team, with enough folks that are excited to participate, it'll end up rubbing off on everyone. And sometimes, the folks on your team that you think will be the least engaged, the least interested, and the most distracting from your purpose really connects with this type of format and can grow and surprise you in phenomenal ways. So make sure that as the facilitator, you're not assuming that people will fall into a certain type of person or the type of personality they generally exhibit in a different day-to-day role. Now, with the knowledge of this formula, you're ready to go out there and put together some engaging, interactive, interesting activities that will help your team roadmap, discuss vision, communicate with one another, develop leadership skills, learn technical skills, and even more. You can find more examples of these kinds of workshops and blog posts about each of the sections of the formula on my website. And thank you.